United Kingdom, modern day. This is Father William Taylor, a Church of England vicar in Hackney, East London. Over the next 12 months, Father William will take on one of the oldest, most powerful and clandestine institutions on planet Earth.
I'm a middle-aged vicar with a kind of slightly posh background in a poor area of Hackney, trying to make sense of my life and the life of this place. Before I was ordained, I did some jobs in the East End of London. I worked in a pub, I taught English, and I did a delivery round for the old fruit and veg market in Spitalfields. So Hackney is one of the 32 London boroughs that cluster around the City of London, the heart of Greater London, like a colony of bees around the queen bee. And Hackney is located directly north of the city on the route of Ermine Street, the Roman road that connects the port of London, Londinium, to the north of England. And in the 17th century, it grew up as one of the first suburbs outside the city. So you've got Shoreditch or Sewerditch, and you've got Hogstown, Hoxton. These are the areas around the city, and it's where poor people settled, particularly people who had to leave the land because of the enclosure movement and come and settle in London. And it's also where today there are the successor communities, poor people that have arrived in Hackney from Vietnam, from Africa, from the Caribbean, from Eastern Europe. So my congregation is made up mainly from families from the Caribbean, from Jamaica, from Antigua, Montserrat, and also from West Africa. So Nigerians, Ghanaians, Sierra Leoneans. It also has some white people, but the congregation does reflect patterns of colonial expansion in the 19th and 20th century. That's evident when you come here on a Sunday.
In recent times, William has observed the tragedy and rage of riot from his doorstep.
In the riots, you saw the feral mob in Hackney taking to the streets with the looting and the burning of cars and the sudden descent into lawlessness. It was pretty frightening.
And his eyes were one of 4 billion pairs that watched the spectacular Olympic Games, hosted in this part of London in 2012.
And then in the period after the riots up into the Olympics, you had the feeling the country was looking over its shoulder at us, wondering whether we were going to start throwing bricks again and start burning tires and cars again. And there was a nervousness as to whether we were going to disgrace the nation when the Olympics came to town.
As colourful, vivid and socially rich as Hackney is, life is hard.
Hackney has poverty as well as relative wealth. It's got the crackheads on the housing estates, it's got the so-called creatives who've moved into lofts and warehouses, and it's got a growing middle class of families who've moved into the Georgian and Victorian terraced houses in the borough. But it's also a place where there are real social problems.
20 people apply for every single job vacancy. Nearly a third of all children here live in poverty.
Poverty is a multiple rather than a single thing. It's having to take several jobs in order to pay the bills and not having enough time to spend with your family. It's dad being in jail or in Jamaica or God knows where. It's your smartphone being your most expensive monthly direct debit. It's always knowing how much money you have in your pocket. It's the regular trudge between the estate and the housing benefit office. It's living in a 2-bedroom flat as a 4-person family. It's overcrowding.
In Hackney, just as in other parts of the United Kingdom, craters have been made that have yet to be filled.
Britain today, it's nervous, it's fearful, it's trying to come off its addiction to debt, it's addicted to all sorts of other things.
The Bank of England estimates the 2008 financial crisis cost this nation a little over £7 trillion.
Is there a moral equivalence between the kids stealing each other's stuff and breaking shop windows and taking stuff in Hackney and the plundering of the public purse by the bankers in the City of London? I think there is.
In the same historic year that saw Olympic fever preoccupy this country's consciousness, another story, a different story, emerged, returned, and would not go away. To some a minor annoyance, to others a necessary evil, to many a moral duty, tax has often sat obliquely within national pictures.
Okay, well this is deep. This is deep stuff. Tax. Tax represents the interests of the public realm that is sponsored and supported and nurtured by the state alongside that of the market. So tax is important. It's important that people pay the tax, that it's not exported.
This is Danielle Paffard, activist from the Vanguard Street Group, UK Uncut.
Tax had, always been something that had just gone from my payslip, same as everyone else in this country. Economics was something that other people dealt with that was kind of distant and far away.
But to those who move within and without of nation states, tax is not applicable. It is avoidable. Jon Snow, senior British journalist and presenter of Channel 4 News.
I think tax avoidance has only really begun to strike people because of austerity. Tax avoidance and austerity simply don't wash well together. People really don't understand why they should be suffering and other people should be making a great deal of money and they're not even paying any tax on it.
This is Richard Brooks, investigative journalist for the famous London-based satirical magazine Private Eye.
We'd been reporting fairly large-scale tax avoidance for, 5 years or so before it really hit the front pages. Suddenly people were realising, hang on, this is quite a serious subject and it has quite serious consequences for all of us. So that was the atmosphere in which, when we wrote the Vodafone story in summer of 2010, people reacted.
This was an email that we received on October the 24th. Have you seen this article? Vodafone have been let off $6 billion in tax that they owe the British government.
Tax avoidance is one of those issues where you can say quite clearly, once you've found it, right, you're not paying your fair share.
And so we sat in the Vodafone shop. There was kind of confusion and chaos, and I guess that was really important. It was something new that was happening. And then it went viral. People were so excited by this idea. Hashtag UK Uncut was born, and then just went wild. By the weekend, there were 30 more actions all around the country, Vodafone stores being shut down.
By this time, the practice of tax avoidance had become so widespread that there were these stories sitting there waiting to be discovered.
I don't know why the mass media have not cottoned onto this a lot earlier. Private Eye have been out ahead, no question. And, for myself, I wish I'd done more.
You'd put out a national call out, you'd say, 2 weeks' time, Topshop, go. And you just watch as, because there was an action map and it was, it's completely grassroots. It's people all around the country just kind of popping up and saying, yes, I'm going to be there on my high street.
Well, I think the ordinary punter is only just beginning to discover about tax avoidance. Hence, I suspect the real row about Amazon, Starbucks, Google, and the rest. And I think as they discover what products they are buying, whose manufacturers are paying nothing, I think there will be legs. I think people will not want to do business with people who aren't contributing to the society in which we live.
Tax avoidance is distinct from tax evasion. The former is a perfectly legal activity. In the field of tax, nuances of language are vitally important. Best-selling author and writer for Vanity Fair magazine, Nicholas Shaxson.
If you drill down to what these places offer, you come to two things really. One is this notion of escape from the responsibilities of society. So those responsibilities might be tax, it might be disclosure, it might be financial regulation, it might be criminal laws. Whatever it is, you take your money elsewhere and you can escape those responsibilities.
A tax haven is a place. It has to be a physical location.
British tax expert and chartered accountant Richard Murphy.
So what it does is pass a law designed to be used by someone else who pretends they've got something going on in the tax haven, but haven't really. They just record something in the tax haven which is really going on elsewhere.
And this word elsewhere is also incredibly important. The laws of the Cayman Islands, for example, are not designed directly for the people of the Cayman Islands. They're designed for people elsewhere. So people who don't use them are, ordinary people, small businesses and so on. And so you effectively end up with one set of rules for the kind of biggest and wealthiest sections of society and another set of rules for everybody else.
This is Ronan Pallon, Professor of International Political Economy at City University in London.
The most accurate estimation at the moment is that at least $22 trillion in financial assets are located or registered offshore.
This estimation amounts to a sum greater than the combined gross domestic product of Japan and the United States of America.
That means that in reality, we have no sovereign debt. That's the reality worldwide. The reality, we have political debt.
Britain has a relatively unusual position compared to other countries in this respect because, on the one hand, the tax authorities are losing money to either tax avoidance or tax evasion. So there is that loss. But on the other hand, you have all this feeder network, this money being fed into the city at the same time. So there's money coming into the city. But that money is not necessarily benefiting the rest of the population.
In the United Kingdom, the most recent estimation of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the national body charged with countering tax avoidance, states that corporate tax avoidance has risen by 48% in a single year. In early 2013, an investigation by one British national newspaper discovered 1 in 4 of the UK's biggest companies pays no tax at all.
Our tax avoidance is almost certainly substantially higher than I can find elsewhere. We lose, in my estimate, about £25 billion of money to tax avoidance a year in the UK. So not nearly as big as tax evasion in total, but still a very large number. In proportionate terms, probably double that of most other European countries.
The stealth and silence of the vast, invisible disappearance of wealth from working countries into global elsewheres is a stark contrast to the cost to people and places where human activity lives and breathes. Western nations with economies and populations in recession can feel the extraction.
Yeah, we've seen a lot more working families coming to us who wouldn't have struggled before, a lot more people who would have been fine, but now they're just tipped over the edge by the things like the rising cost of food and the rising cost of fuel. People who have been made redundant, we've seen a huge increase in the number of people coming through who have suffered from redundancy or from loss of contracts when they're self-employed. So it's not the kind of people that you'd expect to see coming to a food bank anymore, and I think that the British public are really shocked by that.
It's your children's food. It's a different game now. It's frightening, and why all of these changes are being made, they're taking money from the wrong areas.
That it's on your doorstep, and it literally is on your doorstep. I delivered a food box across the road, and that kind of shocked me when I took it to a family who lived opposite me. I could see their house through my window.
We shouldn't have to face cuts to emergency services that provide such a vital service to coastal communities.
They say, for example, They have apprenticeships to offer you. Volunteer work is the best thing to do now and such, especially for people my age, my generation. But I've been doing volunteer work for the past 5 years and it has not come in any beneficial way to me.
And this colossal extraction is felt more severely and desperately in the developing nations of the global south, especially in Africa. This is Chris Jordan from the international aid agency Action Aid.
Developing countries lose huge amounts every single year to corporate tax avoidance. It's estimated that they lose in the region of $160 billion each and every year. Now, that's far more than all of the aid that they receive. It's massive amounts.
Pamela Chizanga, senior aid worker in Zambia, Southern Africa.
When you talk about poverty in Zambia, it's basically a lack of the basic, services, social services that we all need even just to survive. A lot of our people are still not able to access health services within the 15 kilometers radius that we have set for ourselves as a country. So many people have to travel 30 kilometers and more to get to a health post. When they do get to this health post, they will not find a qualified doctor, particularly in the rural areas. They will find perhaps a nurse. Sometimes they will find maybe a cleaner who has been converted into a nurse because it's no medical personnel.
Corporate tax avoidance has a devastating impact on the lives of ordinary people in developing countries. We think that 85,000 children's lives could be saved every single year if companies paid their fair share of tax.
Even if the simple benchmark was whether people have a meal a day, in this country, not many families are fortunate enough to have more than one meal a day.
98 of the FTSE 100 are using tax havens, and 82 of those companies have serious operations in the developing world, all of which stand to benefit from making profits, making money in poor countries, but then siphoning those profits into offshore tax havens, which are often very closely related to the UK government.
Schools that shouldn't even exist because the infrastructure there is so dilapidated. People who are drinking from wells and all that, the water is not safe, so it could be invested in providing cleaner and safe water for the residents of Mazabuka.
We in the UK are undermining development, undermining democracy, undermining legitimate governments by denying those people the tax they need to have the public services, the basic things, sanitation, water, healthcare, education, transport. These are basic things that they need in many parts of the world, and our tax havens are preventing that happening.
This country would be in a different place altogether. We wouldn't need to borrow money to be able to do some of the things that we are doing. We wouldn't need to be so dependent on donor aid because we would be able to meet most of these costs on our own.
ActionAid has been investigating for the last 12 months the tax avoidance by Associated British Foods. They're a FTSE 100 listed company with their headquarters in London. Now they own Silver Spoon, Primark, Ryvita, a whole host of brand names that you'll have heard about. We looked specifically at their sugar operations in Zambia and we found systematic tax avoidance. The company was making huge transactions and payments through tax havens to lower their bills. Now, overall, since Associated British Foods took over in 2007, we think that Zambia has lost out on $27 million. That's a massive amount in a very poor country where 2/3 of people live below the poverty line, 45% of children suffer from malnutrition. It could put 48,000 extra children in school each and every year if this company just paid its fair share.
Tax avoidance becomes very easy when you do not have a relationship with the people around you that you know will benefit. from you doing the right thing. They know that we are desperate in terms of needing that kind of investment. They know that they can manipulate the system, they can manipulate the government. The bottom line is that they do it because they find it easy to take advantage of countries, poor countries like Zambia, poor people like Zambians. So, we are not able to push as much as we should to make these corporates accountable.
On a frozen London dawn, Father William Taylor is taking a bus ride the short distance from Hackney to the city. He is joined by a member of his church congregation, an office cleaner in the financial district. Privately, William is considering standing for election to the City of London's powerful Common Council.
The city has 25 wards, and I've got to decide which ward I'm going to stand in, and I want to have a connection with that ward. And it would be really nice if I stood in a ward in which one of my parishioners worked. And so I'm gonna find out where George works, which office he works in, and which ward he's in, and I might indeed stand in that ward. George is a parishioner of mine. He's married to Doris, and they're a Ghanaian couple. George came to Britain in 1985. He used to teach in Africa. He used to teach environmental science, but since he's been in England, he's always worked as a cleaner. And today we're going to go in and see where he works. I'm interested to know which building in the city he cleans. Theologically, stealing isn't just about taking stuff that's not belonging to you. It's also theologically, Augustine wrote about this, Luther wrote about this, it's withholding what could be used profitably by others, by those in need. And so I see the avoidance of paying tax by big companies as a kind of theft from the common purse.
I think tax avoidance is actually a very complicated subject, particularly for the British media, because of course this country actually harbours the largest tax avoidance havens in the world. We have, I think, at least 13 of them, which are directly connected to the Crown, directly connected to the government.
The Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands has only 15 members, but as they represent some of the richest constituencies in the world, it was appropriate that the Queen should grant them a state opening. In her speech, she avoided referring to the joys of tax havens, discreetly speaking of encouraging the private sector. So the West Indies part of the tour ended, pointing up a small irony. The Queen was leaving one of the richest islands on the globe to fly to Mexico, one of the most bankrupt of nations.
In the ocean of global tax avoidance and offshore tax havens, the United Kingdom is the major dominant current. Of the 73 jurisdictions listed in the Global Financial Secrecy Index, nearly half are directly connected to the United Kingdom. The most notorious of these territories, singing God Save the Queen as a national anthem beneath the unfurling Union Jacks, are the Caribbean havens Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and the British Virgin Islands.
So there's a huge kind of British flavour to the offshore zone, and all the different nodes in the network are kind of half in and half out of Britain.
The reality of the independence of these territories from the UK is based on how useful it is to argue that they are independent or not. There are no clearly set rules. There are conventions and norms, and when it is useful, the British governments claim that they are completely independent.
The relationship between the UK and its overseas territories, like the Cayman Islands, is a complex one. I actually think they're a little different from county councils, to bring it down to sort of terms that most people might understand.
And it's very difficult to explain to people why, and you need to get people to understand the complexities of a country which once had an empire, is running a number of small island offshore tax havens, and yet is saying, we want people to pay all their taxes here. It doesn't add up.
How did these far-off islands, as topographically and climatically distinct from the mother island as one can imagine, come to be British?
It's one of the most extraordinary transformation, not only of the British state, but of any development that took place in the second part of the 20th century. On the face of it, the British Empire simply disappeared, melted away within a decade and a half. But in reality, within the ashes of this British Empire's kernel re-emerge of what I would call the Second British Empire. Those islands changed tremendously, and in some ways not as much as you may think. These are not Dubais. These are not Abu Dhabi of this world, or Shanghai. You don't see them, you don't hear them. You have to know where to go in order to see a brass plate. So in that sense, you will not see this high-rise building of modern finance in Cayman or Bermuda. You still see, but you see wealth. Half of the population of Caymans are expats. These are mostly of British origins or American origins, that completely transformed that particular island. But not only Cayman, the same is true to a lesser extent of Bermuda and of British Virgin Islands. They are now at the very core of the world economy, although they seem to be very far away. Those people who own the hotels, people who own the prime properties are expats. The locals live inland, and they tend to be quite poor. The reality of this country is that there's a huge gap between the very rich and the very poor. Since the mid-1960s, the Cayman Islands became the fourth largest financial center in the world. That's the fourth largest. Cayman is just about the same size as Frankfurt.
Cayman Islands is ranked second in the current global Financial Secrecy Index. According to the New York Times, there's more money deposited in the Caymans than in all the banks in New York City combined. Cayman, says the Times, is a tax-free home to over 9,000 hedge funds, banks, and companies that operate mostly elsewhere around the world. US President Barack Obama discovered, in his own words, a building in the Cayman Islands that supposedly houses 12,000 corporations. He continued, "That's either the biggest building or the biggest tax scam on record." That building, now home to over 19,000 hidden business identities, is the headquarters of the world's leading tax avoidance law firm, Maples & Calder. Maples have a significant hub operation in the United Kingdom and were established by former Conservative Party Vice Chairman and British parliamentarian, the late Baron John Maples. The British Virgin Islands, the next largest offshore centre, has a population of around 30,000 and is home to nearly 3,000 hidden hedge funds and over 400,000 companies. Bermuda, referred to by the Financial Times as the world's risk capital, is the offshore centre of choice for the insurance industry. Bermuda made international headlines recently when it was revealed that technology monolith Google had channeled an estimated $10 billion in revenue through its swaying palms, saving around $2 billion in taxes to national governments. On each of these islands, a governor is appointed by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Although all of these tropical islands have directly elected local government and cabinets, via blanket powers reserved to their national constitutions, British governors can exercise complete executive authority as and when they choose. They can also reserve bills of law to allow the British Queen to make a personal decision. All laws, including any of those dictating what overseas transnational companies or individuals can do financially on those territories, must receive royal assent from the Queen at Buckingham Palace, London. The current royal assent given to laws made in Cayman, Bermuda, or the British Virgin Islands is La Reine remercie ses bons sujets, accepte leur bénévolence et ainsi le vaut, which in English translation is the Queen thanks her good subjects, accepts their bounty, and wills it so.
That doesn't happen in independent places. So that doesn't really even happen to some extent in our county councils. They've got more power to self-govern than the Cayman Islands have. So we know exactly what they're doing, why they're doing it. They have to justify it to us. We have to rubber stamp it. We have to approve it. We have to tell them it's all okay. Let's not pretend they're anything but ours.
They are really part of the UK in reality, in my view.
So the whole of this pretense that these places are independent, self-governing, merely under our protection, is frankly farcical.
At the end of 2012, deep into the British and international austerity period, the incumbent Prime Minister of the Cayman Islands flew to London to meet British government ministers and indeed Prime Minister David Cameron. Inside the British Foreign Office, the Cayman Islands Premier gave a private seminar to government and the other premiers of UK overseas territories and crown dependencies, titled Building Successful and Resilient Economies. This event was not reported by any national British media outlets. 6 days later, the Cayman Islands Prime Minister flew home from London and was arrested for corruption. Despite opposition and media calls within Cayman for immediate elections, the British governor installed a new Prime Minister without any electoral process or consultation with the Cayman Islands population. The move was welcomed by the Cayman Islands financial services industry and the island's Chamber of Commerce, which stated, "Political stability is a cornerstone of any successful democracy." On the most recent visit to Cayman of a member of the elected British government, the Foreign Office Minister stated, "This UK government is proud of the achievements of the Cayman Islands. We will continue to support you to make the most of global business opportunities." In a recent letter to the Financial Times, United Nations Advisor on Economics, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, said of the Cayman Islands, "This house of cards is a mortal threat to the world economy, as well as an abuse of basic financial practices. It is a playground of Wall Street and European politicians, and it is reckless." The present UK government, led by the British Conservative Party, holds deep ideological and personal connections to tax havens. London-based newspaper The Guardian reported that the significant personal wealth Prime Minister David Cameron inherited from his father was amassed and managed in internationally recognized tax havens. The current Conservative government minister, with direct responsibility for dealing with tax avoidance impacting the United Kingdom, David Gauke MP, is a former tax avoidance lawyer who practiced in the UK's financial centre, the City of London. But the connection between British politicians and global tax havens transcends any one single political party. Is there any overriding explanation for the UK's singular immersion in global tax havens?
It's interesting to look back historically, the debate that took place in the 1950s. At that time, there were two centers in Europe vying for supremacy, London and Paris. And the bets were on Paris, that Paris is going to take over. Paris is going to become the largest financial center representing Europe. Well, they were wrong.
If anybody in the UK wants to know why the city is so big and so powerful, they have to understand the importance of this network. We're talking hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars flowing in to the city.
The City of London could connect with its dependencies in the Caribbean, which serves basically the American markets. So the City of London had a foothold in the large American market, which was the most significant markets in the 1960s. And then, of course, the City of London has also, the British Empire had a foothold in Singapore and Hong Kong, in Asia. Paris didn't have that. That's one of the main reasons why the City of London survived the decline of Britain in relative terms, comparing to the rise of the United States and, of course, the rise of Germany.
The City of London is the head office, and Cayman, Jersey, Guernsey, Isle of Man, British Virgin Islands, they're the branch offices.
The connection between the British territories means that the City of London exists not only in London or in Europe, it exists all over the world. It's the same city. And the City of London, although activities, transactions can take place here, they can be registered elsewhere. So the City of London has a unique advantage vis-à-vis, say, New York, Tokyo, Shanghai, or Hong Kong. They don't have these facilities.
The question that we need to ask the City of London is it a service industry or is it a self-service industry? Is it accountable? Is it using its resources to promote the common good? Is it serving the consumer? Because you get the feeling, looking on as I do as a layperson, that the system is completely out of whack and out of control, that it's capital that's calling the shots, and it's the deal makers in the city, the guys who are doing the deals, that are taking the benefits, and it's the rest of us who are left out of the picture.
Conservative Member of Parliament for the City of London and Westminster, Mark Field.
It's the great centre of London. It was the big trading centre that began about 2,000 years ago in Roman times.
Baron Glassman, senior British academic and parliamentarian.
It's still a commune, established in 1191. We don't really think of the City of London as a commune, but a commune is a self-governing city. So the City of London is actually, it's very ambiguous whether Parliament can legislate for the city.
You know, I'm absolutely an example of somebody who earns absurd amounts of money.
This is Jonathan Ruffer, senior London financier and head of the global Ruffer hedge fund that manages over £15 billion of assets annually.
Now, I deliberately use the word absurd rather than immoral, because it seems to me that the big income is an absurdity, and what I do with it could easily be immoral.
The system is working exclusively for the rich, and then a whole load of things have happened in our society that people have had no control over.
If you started with a blank sheet of paper, you wouldn't start there. But one of the reasons we are very proud in this country is that we haven't really had to start with a blank sheet of paper.
Now, once you're like that, you're in a sewer. Nothing, springs out of you and says, "Watch out!" Section 3. This is something that's really going to catch you out. How would you like to see that on the front page of the Daily Mirror? It's too arcane. It's too technical, and that is the undergrowth in which we all work.
Inches from the eastern border of the City of London, within the English Gothic masterpiece of Christchurch Spitalfields, Father William is holding a press conference to announce to the world his challenge to the global capital of finance.
I'm feeling a little bit nervous today. In some ways, I feel I'm out of my depth. I feel I'm getting these people together And I don't know the detail of what goes on in the city. I don't know the technicalities of the financial services. But on the other hand, my sense is that not many people do. And I don't think even those that work in the city know really what's going on. And actually, we are all out of our depth. And this is deep. We're in a very deep bit of lagoon here. And we need to be careful as we cross it. It's an important thing for me, both as a citizen of London but also as a consumer. My mum lost a whole bunch of money because she had shares in RBS. She's a widow, she's a pensioner, she's lost a lot of her savings. I think she had the money in RBS because she's Scottish. It wasn't a wise investment decision. But that's our story as Britain today. We've lost money in the city. We want to know why, and we want to know that the City of London is acting on our behalf, that it's serving our interests rather than serving its own, and that's what we're hoping to achieve today, to begin that conversation.
For William, the challenge will be a long war.
There is a kind of caricature of the turbulent priest who heads into danger and causes an uproar. But I resist that because I'm actually, my instincts are generally very conservative. I'm for incremental change. I'm in favour of strong institutions. I think relationships are important, particularly with those that disagree with you. So, I'm having to confront an institution and a system that is quite hostile to my presence.
Still the case that New York can't compare to London in terms of global flows, and this is a direct outflow of empire. Money flowed in, money went out. It was what's called a financial hub.
Nick Mathiasen from the London-based Bureau of Investigative Journalism.
The tax havens are a vital piece of the architecture for the financial services offer that makes London the world's most important and dominant financial centre.
So let's call the city financial world a society. When society has an opportunity to enrich themselves and to do things the sole purpose of which is to make themselves richer rather than to make what they're doing more effective for other people, is this something that is wrong? And I would say the answer is definitely yes.
It's effectively seen off all forms of political reform for 1,000 years. That's quite an amazing achievement.
Elections in the city are utterly unique. All 250 foreign banks based in the city have voting rights in this local British election. It is estimated that local residents hold around 9,000 individual votes. Business votes amount to around 24,000.
So we're standing in the middle of Walbrook Ward. This is the ward I'm contesting in the election today. It's about the same size as Wembley Stadium, 5 or 6 streets adjoining one another. On my right here, you've got the Bank of England. Then on Princes Street, you've got the Bank of China, you've got Ishbank, a big Turkish bank, you've got Cheapside, you've got Mansion House, where the Lord Mayor lives. Here you have Cornhill, where there are wealth managers and venture capitalists, and you've got the Royal Exchange. This building isn't in my ward, but all of these buildings are. Now, Walbrook gets its name from the brook that starts in Hackney, in Shoreditch, the sewer ditch. It's a sewer that runs from Shoreditch underneath the entrance to the London Wall, right down underneath the Bank of England and down Walbrook into the Thames. So the sewage that begins in Hackney, where I live, where I work, ends up in the River Thames that flows into the seas and the oceans of the world, and it passes down beside Mansion House. That's why I'm interested in standing in this ward. I want to bring this sewage to light. I want to show people what's going on in the city. I want there to be a living stream that, like Moses banging the rock in the wilderness, allows water to spring forth and rivers flow in the dry places. That's the purpose of my contesting this Walbrook Ward election. I know it sounds a little bit apocalyptic. Well, it is.
Quite apart and independent of the governance and services that apply to the other 32 London boroughs, the city operates its own police force, its own Lord Mayor, and its own local authority. The ancient square mile exerts extraordinary influence.
There is a lot of very, very cynical politics going on, and there is a very deliberate and long-term effort by the city, by both the banks and the city corporation, to effectively capture the policy-making apparatus. Financial services generally, but also the City of London Corporation. They both lobby and they're both very keen on tax havens. They love tax havens. They can use them for tax avoidance. They can use them for financial regulatory arbitrage. They can use them for all sorts of reasons. So there is this kind of active lobbying going on.
The head of the City of London is in constant communication with the Chancellor and the Prime Minister to ensure that the City of London's rights and business model are respected across the world.
If the city wishes, they can see the Queen or the head of the state in a week, that they must answer to them in a week if there's a matter of great concern. So there's the city were way ahead of the game in terms of lobbying, and they remain ahead of the game in terms of lobbying.
Last year it emerged that over 60 MPs had connections with companies in tax havens. At the same time, the Bureau found out that 16% of members of the House of Lords were paid by financial services companies. Among key committees that were scrutinising really important financial regulation, nearly half of their members were paid by the financial services companies.
So they set up, I think in the 1530s, the Office of the Remembrancer, in order to remind and to remember the ancient traditions of London, and to do that in Parliament. It's the oldest lobbyist institution in the world, as far as I know. So the Remembrancer is the only lobbyist that's allowed to enter the Chamber of Parliament. They're allowed to enter the Commons and the Lords in order to pass on information. It has a seat right next to the Speaker, their own designated seat next to the Speaker. And the Remembrancer is there to uphold the interests of the City of London in the body politic.
The City of London's Remembrancer, with uniquely free, unfettered access to both houses of the British Parliament, has an annual budget of £5.3 million and a team of 6 lawyers on hand.
Yes, that figure does have certain rights here in the House of Parliament and is able to have rights of audience on Treasury and other related matters. Again, some of that is perhaps of more historical nature than necessarily day-to-day trampling on the rights of Parliament as a whole, but it reflects, I think, the importance of the city. As I say, if you started with a blank sheet of paper, I don't think necessarily it's the way that we would operate.
We found there were over 130 organisations employing close to 1,000 people with a war chest of £92 million advocating on policy at the very highest level, and they have managed to secure seriously astounding policy wins.
When seeking to redesign the more repellent abuses of the British tax system, the Conservative-led administration established several committees to provide strategic oversight of the development of corporate tax policy. The Controlled Foreign Companies rules, the legislation of such great concern to domestic and international poverty agencies, fell within this advisory framework. The advisory panels did not include any noted economists, academics, or independent tax experts. They were entirely comprised of corporate executives representing leading London-listed FTSE 100 companies. In the case of these executives advising the British government on the most sensitive Controlled Foreign Companies law, the FTSE 100 corporations they represent collectively hold 4,021 subsidiaries in global tax havens. This process was not reported by any British media outlets.
The city's made up of lots of people who actually I think are decent, hard-working family types. But there is a demonic system at work within the organisation that is very dark and very powerful, and engaging with that concerns me, and I am worried about that. You know, I'm worried about that. My wife, she's very supportive, although she wonders what I'm doing at all these meetings in the city. It's something that anybody, I think, that is concerned about the future of our society needs to pay attention to. It's the dominant idolatry of the age, the way that the financial services calls the shots. The city feels genuinely that it's a really good place, and it's doing really good work for all sorts of people, and so it doesn't like it when you question what it's up to. It feels kind of quite indignant. So the first 12 months, what I'd hope to do is build up some kind of relational base within the city, corporation, also within my ward, and then also realise what the pressure points are, what the city's really reluctant to do, what it doesn't want to tell people. That's always an interesting thing, where the secrets are, and then I'd get my torch and I'd shine it in that direction. That's my plan.
With trust in the city and all global financial institutions at a historic low, and with public anger at tax haven use at a peak across borders and hemispheres, are there any visible signs of change? In London, political rhetoric around tax havens has reached full-blooded, graphic levels. The Prime Minister and his Chancellor have repedately described tax avoidance as morally repellent and even repugnant.
In the same speech, when he was saying this, finding this stuff morally repugnant, he was creating a wealth of new loopholes for corporations to shovel profits into tax havens and to really accelerate the whole tax haven race.
So when David Cameron says that he's happy to reduce corporate tax rates, but he wants companies to pay those tax rates, next door, George Osborne is bringing in new tax laws that mean they won't pay anything like even the low rates, the low headline rates of tax.
So all of the 82 FTSE 100 companies that have operations in the developing world, tax avoidance from those companies is likely to spiral.
In 2013, the G8, the heads of the world's largest economies, met in the United Kingdom. The British Prime Minister insisted that tax avoidance would be their top priority. The previous time a major summit of this kind met in the UK was in 2009, with the financial world in existential shock from the banking crisis, which had erupted less than 12 months earlier. During that G20 summit, then British Prime Minister Gordon Brown publicly declared the end of tax havens. Mr. Brown said the world had no place for old tax havens, and that global hedge funds must be controlled. His G20 colleagues agreed.
You had the G20, the club of rich, big, powerful countries, saying the era of banking secrecy is over and we're now going to crack down on this. And this was in the context of austerity and financial crisis. 5 days after the G20 announcement, the blacklist was empty, which gives an indication of how serious the effort was. Today, the grey list only has 3 jurisdictions on it as I speak now. It has the financial giants of Niue, Nauru, and Guatemala on it, and everybody else is clean.
The OECD too stated the era of bank secrecy is over.
And there are all sorts of mechanisms that were put in place that tax havens have used to say, look how clean we are. We're cooperating with these international mechanisms, but at the end of the day, these mechanisms are only slightly better than useless.
Developments in the G20 and at the OECD are a convenient distraction for the government because they allow them to say, look what we're doing on the world stage. We're leading the way in reforming the international tax system. Those changes won't really make that much difference.
Data covering this crackdown period from the Bank of International Settlements has received rare, unique analysis by 2 senior academics, Niels Johansen, economics professor at the University of Copenhagen, and Gabriel Zucman of the Paris School of Economics. Johansen and Zucman concluded that these efforts largely failed, that the flow of funds to tax havens has barely changed since 2007, and that secretive jurisdictions had actually increased their share of business over the crackdown period.
We have a preponderance, a mass of tax accountants based in the City of London in particular, who are there to service the multinational companies.
100% of the top 10 growing and expanding global offshore law firms, headquartered in British overseas territories, all have operational hubs in the ancient square mile, the City of London. In 2012, Maples and Calder, the same British law firm described by President Barack Obama as the biggest tax scam on record, leapfrogged its nearest competitor to return to the top of the offshore top 30 law firms. The firm estimates that it acted on the formation of over 1/3 of new funds registered in the Cayman Islands in 2012 and advised on over 900 master-funded structures overall. Tax avoidance facilitated by the major offshore firms remains perfectly legal. But in perilous, inclement economic times, with the British Prime Minister declaring war on tax avoidance in international arenas, and a United States President openly deploring it, how can the tax avoidance industry and UK-centred offshore pioneers like Maples and Calder continue to prosper? One explanation has been offered by Alistair Robertson, a senior partner with Maples and Calder. Speaking to the Cayman Islands media in 2012, Mr. Robertson explained, "It is no mere coincidence. All of the leading international financial centres share one common feature with us, namely that each is an overseas territory or crown dependency. We provide a platform for international transfer of capital into the UK through, amongst others, funds and structured finance products. The structuring and management of these products generates substantial amounts of revenue for the City of London." He also noted, "Businesses are comforted by the knowledge that the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service can rely upon UK police forces to assist with more specialised and problematic issues." So despite renewed global efforts to curtail tax avoidance, most notably the new significant FATCA initiative being driven by the Obama administration, now being emulated in a diluted form by other states, tax avoidance processed via the United Kingdom and its territories appears impervious to the mood of the times.
They're hiring some of the most expensive lobbyists to make their case at the highest level in Europe and the UK, and also in Washington.
The policies against tax havens are being led not by the OECD or by the IMF, certainly not by the IMF or by the G7. They're being led primarily now by the US and secondarily by the European Union. And it's not simply the US, it's the Obama administration.
The United States is currently the most aggressive in pursuing tax haven abuses. Compared to the United Kingdom, it is going a lot further. The United Kingdom is absolutely appalling in failing to address the most egregious things that are going on.
To my mind, the United States is now adopting a policy of what I call NIMBY, not in my backyard. You can register in Cayman, Bermuda, wherever you want. But if you want to do any business with a US entity, then the US will insist that you reveal all information about anybody, any beneficiary of their accounts. And that is transformative. The European Union and the main European countries are now joining in with the United States.
In 2012, a major alternative investment summit was convened on the Cayman Islands. This major-scale, entirely private summit was sponsored by all major offshore law firms, including Maples and Calder. Keynote speakers were British entrepreneur Sir Richard Branson and former US President George W. Bush. Subsequent to the summit, back in London, the UK government and their British overseas territories issued a joint communiqué pledging to encourage investment in the territories by agreeing clear and transparent policies for incentivizing investment and removing unnecessary red tape and restrictions on economic activity. This announcement was not reported by any British national media outlet.
Our problem is that we have a government that goes along with it and even encourages it. That's what distinguishes us from other countries like the United States, France and Germany. Of course, the same multinationals are operating in those countries and they have the same attitude to reducing tax bills in those countries. But they have a bit more of a battle to do so. They're very vulnerable to the lobbying they receive, and they do receive a huge amount of lobbying. Some of the politicians don't quite understand the subject well enough. So when the CBI or some other lobbying group says, if you don't reduce our tax bills, we'll leave the country, they don't quite understand that you can't just take a multinational lock, stock and barrel out of the country. They're too easily swayed by that threat.
Today in total, the UK's 100 biggest companies maintain 8,311 active subsidiaries in global tax havens.
Britain is becoming a tax haven. Francis Moore let it slip not so long ago, where he said he was happy for Britain to be considered a tax haven. That's not a radical notion. That is what's happening. But of course, we don't need to. We're a serious economy. We don't need to compete in those terms.
Back in the wintry, shoelace lanes of the City of London, Election Day has arrived for the international finance houses and for Father William Taylor.
So today's Election Day. It's the day that the city goes to the polls to vote for a new Common Council, and we had our ward mote this morning. The ward mote is the nearest that you get to a political hustings in the City of London, and in Wardbrook there are 8 candidates, 8 of us standing. There are 2 seats, so it's competitive. One of the other candidates turns out that she is a regulation lawyer in the same company, in the same building where George, my parishioner, works as a cleaner. So that was kind of interesting. I sat next to her. People say they'll vote. They'll say they'll vote for you. Whether they do or not, you never know. But I think 1 or 2 of them will. I think there's a property man that I met who had told me he definitely was going to vote for me. The guy who cleans the Lord Mayor's shoes down in the underground station said he was going to come up and vote for us. So yeah, I think we've got a few people who are definites. I think the key thing is getting people to turn out and vote for you on the day. So we're going to make some telephone calls later and go and knock some people up. That's the technical term. The ward mote reconvenes at 9:30 in the ballroom in Mansion House, which is when the votes will be counted. And so there are 390 voters in the ward. It won't take more than probably about 10-15 minutes to count the people who voted, so we'll know almost immediately who's got in.
So who was elected? It was the grocer. That's the liveryman from the Worshipful Company of Grocers. He's actually an accountant. He was elected, and the woman who worked in the office that George cleans, she was also elected. They got about 70 votes each, and I got 28 votes, so not even close. But that's one for every day of the campaign. You know, if it'd been a bit longer, maybe we'd have got a few more votes. And, you know, that's 28 people, about 20%, 15 to 20% of the people who voted to support some unknown clergyman saying the financial services need to serve the common good, need to serve the consumer, need to be accountable, need to be more transparent. The City of London Corporation needs to get off its well-padded backside and take some leadership role. So that's, you know, 28 people, bless them.
You know, defeat at the polls is always bitter, no matter how expected the result is. But the people spoke, all 172 of the electors in Walbrook Ward. And what did they say? They said, steady as she goes. Let's not rock the boat, as you were. They didn't want change. They're not going to get change. Now, a company like the one that manages the building where George works has about 50 resident workers, so people who work in reception, people who clean like George does, mechanical and electrical engineers, security, and that should generate about 10 votes when they're allocated amongst them. None of them got votes. It was only the management company that got the vote in that instance. They weren't even consulted. And then it needs to allocate those votes to reflect the overall composition of the workforce. But companies routinely ignore this. They just send their bosses, the directors, to the polls. So for example, Prudential, that has about half men, half women, only trust their men to vote in the election. It conceals something that I think is very dark, and it's hard to see it. And if you refer to it or if you engage with it openly, maybe it's a British thing, but you feel like you're farting at a tea party. You feel like you're interrupting something that should be treated with so much more respect.
Can the psychology and the global behavior of the holy place of global finance ever be changed? A new development, a possible new addition to the international tax haven system, has been identified by the African media. And the Nairobi development appears to have the guidance of an old master.
So when I was campaigning in the city election, I kept an eye on the African press, and I came across this report that said that Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, was being lined up to become an international financial centre in Africa. I was kind of interested in that. What might this mean for the people of Kenya, in fact, the whole of the African region? In fact, for international financial centres globally? Well, I did a little bit more research, and I found out that a key partner in this development of the Nairobi Financial Centre was a body called the City UK. It was set up by the City Corporation, but with a big cheque from the city's cash account, the private money of the city, back in 2008 when I was a councillor, as a kind of independent lobby body. And this was happening in 2008 at the time when the banks were imploding, when the financial centres around the world looked like they were coming to Armageddon, that the City Corporation was already planning and thinking ahead. So what did the City of London get for its investment in this project? Well, it got a commitment that it could choose the overall composition of the board that sat on City UK. It could choose the president, that's the Lord Mayor, and the deputy chair is Mark Boliat, who's the chairman of Policy and Resources, and it could say who the chairman was. So it basically could call the shots where it came to the composition of City UK. And then when you look at the list of all the companies that are represented on the board, they're all tax haven loving FTSE 100 companies. They are the ones that are promoting this system globally, and they're at the heart of it in this initiative in Nairobi.
I look at the tax avoiders and I just despair of them. Not because, on top of everything else they're grasping, they also make it their business to avoid tax, but it's just their nature. Just in the same way that if you meet a bully, don't be surprised if you brush him as you pass him on the bus, that he doesn't thump you in the face. That's these guys will go on doing the wrong thing, and they have no sense of doing wrong.
There are some initiatives to do with exchange of information on bank accounts for tax purposes, and they're very small, good, but very small incremental changes. There's no sign that a big change of approach is on the cards, and that's what you need. And indeed, if you're tinkering around with some minor initiatives, the suggestion is that you don't want to achieve anything on a bigger scale.
Are that the volume of activities that work their way through the offshore world in terms of volume, the number of companies, the transfer of capital, and so on and so forth, we don't see any decline. We don't understand it. And my only answer is they seem to know something that we don't. And hence we have to stay vigilant. This is not the end of the story.
I don't think I